I'm quite a big Bioshock fan and have been ever since a friend introduced me to it back in my first year of college. That time around I was studying games design, but then again it was BCOT, and trying to learn game design or basically anything from them was like trying to learn auto repair from a blind drunk horse. I fell instantly in love with pretty much everything about it. Bioshock, not the course, or the horse, whichever one you might have confused that for. I adored the environment. Exploring the underwater failed utopia of Rapture was as exciting as it was unnerving. I loved the story and its themes that focused both on the free will of man and the effects of unchecked capitalism and greed. I loved the approach to gameplay, having to combine superpowers and firearms to fight for survival against the crazed citizens who would murder you for just a little taste of Adam, the gene-manipulating super drug that let men become gods, and I loved that the game gave me something else that would annoy all my friends with. Seriously, I couldn't shut up about it for a while. I'm also one of the weirdos who legitimately loves Bioshock 2. I know in the franchise it's seen as the bad game, but I never really understood why. Sure, it's a bit less graphically impressive, and yeah, I'll agree it wasn't necessary, it wasn't a necessary sequel, but so what? It was another chance to head to Rapture and tussle with the splicers. I guess people didn't like the little sister mechanic and how if you wanted all the Adam you had to protect a sis whilst she was harvesting it, but I never saw them as an issue. It was just a brief game of defense, and it's not like you needed to worry much about her because the little sister couldn't die, she was immortal. You just had to protect yourself for a little while and occasionally make sure that splicers weren't messing with her. It wasn't really that difficult, though I can kind of see why having to repeatedly do that might annoy someone. Shortcomings aside, Bioshock 2 was a solid shooter and even fixed certain issues that the first game had, like by yeeting that stupid tile matching hacking minigame thing and swapping it for a QTE in the rare case of a QTE actually being a fix for something rather than being the issue itself. It also let us dual wield plasmids and firearms, had a much more focused level progression, still remembered to reward exploration, and had a decent enough plot that wasn't as deep as the original but was still enjoyable, and on top of all of that it brought us the Big Sister, one of my favourite video game enemies. Hey, what can I say, I'm a sucker for a baddie with a twisted backstory and the ability to throw fire at you. The point is, I was and still am a fan. I still remember the exact surge of emotions that went through me when I learned that the third Bioshock title was to be released. It was 2012, I was talking with a former friend and it came up in conversation. I was excited and upset. Excited for more Bioshock because I always want more Bioshock, and upset because it would not be set in Rapture. It wasn't anything personal, Bioshock Infinite. I was a moody teenager with undiagnosed mental health issues who genuinely struggled with any change, no matter how minor that change might have been. If you made me sit in the wrong chair during class, I would have had a breakdown. I was like Sheldon Cooper, except I had a repugnant personality and basically no friends. So I was like Sheldon Cooper. Hearing this drastic change, I was less than thrilled, and sadly it would take until around 2016 for me to really be able to appreciate what Infinite was. I got Infinite for Christmas in 2013 and I beat it by the end of Boxing Day. I wouldn't admit back then that I had fun, but I'm older, wiser and sexier now, so I certainly will. Bioshock Infinite is certainly a good game with a lot to offer. Let's explore why, shall we? Also, I apologise for how long this video is and how long it took to make. I kept running into mental roadblocks and a lot of the time I was just unhappy with what I had written. I spent most of the time I was meant to be recording the original lines, editing the original lines, and it occurred to me that maybe that meant I wanted a better script in general. Let's hope it was worth it. Bioshock Infinite, here we go. Also, by the way, just consider this whole video to be one big spoiler warning. I'll even put the little clip up.
No spoilers! No spoilers!
Booker, are you afraid of God?
No. But I'm afraid of you.
Bioshock Infinite is a first-person shooter that sees a man, Booker DeWitt, lay siege to a city in the sky, all in the name of rescuing a girl named Elizabeth from a holy man named Zachary Comstock. If you go to play Infinite after just beating Bioshocks 1 and 2, then the combat system will feel both familiar yet very different. The first major change is the firearms. You can only carry 2 guns at a time in Bioshock Infinite, which strikes me as a bit of an odd choice. The guns have harsh limits on their ammo reserves, which has always been the case, but the first 2 games made sure to give you a multitude of weapons because they were mostly situational and you need to swap between them to better tackle the challenges you faced. Another difference are the weapon upgrades. You no longer have to seek out rare stations that can spit out a singular upgrade before closing down forever. You can just buy the upgrades from vending machines which are readily available. I do like the added convenience of this, though the upgrades were nothing special. They marginally improved the performance of the guns and didn't have any effect on the weapon model, which was a shame. I like it in games when mods that you equip to a piece of weaponry actually have a, impact on the appearance as they probably should. It's the main reason I'd upgrade a gun in a game. Yeah, I really am one of those players. Alongside the guns, you have the Vigors, which play the same role as the Plasmids from the previous games, but with a new name. Unlike the guns, you can have all 8 Vigors with you at once, though you can only have 2 ready at any given time. It's a simple matter of opening a quick menu and choosing the power you want when you want it. Whilst in general the Vigors don't feel anywhere near as necessary to your survival in combat, even under harder difficulty settings, at least in my experience, they are a lot of fun to use. There are 8 in total, and we're going to go through them all, because why not? Firstly, there is Possession, which is basically a hybrid of Security Bullseye and Hypnotize from the original games. Possession allows you to turn turrets and bots into allies. It also has a nifty feature where if you shoot it at a vending machine, the vending machine will spit out some money. With a single upgrade, the Vigor also turns living enemies into allies, which is handy, and when the effect wears off, the enemy gamer ends themselves. That bit, the gamer end bit, doesn't work on the heavy hitters like the firemen or the crows, but I think that's fine. Next we have Devil's Kiss, basically Incinerate from the first games, only this time you're throwing a fiery ball that also explodes. Pretty cool upgrade, and also quite effective for crowd control. Then we have Bucking Bronco, which levitates enemies into the air so you can punish them, not like that, get your mind out the gutter. Then there's Shock Jockey, who needs the power company? It's Electro Bolt, with a crystal theme. It stuns enemies and machines, what more can I say? Then we have Murder of Crows, which is just Insect Swarm, but it has birds instead of the bees. Does the same thing really, it briefly distracts some enemies so that you can shoot them. Then you have Charge, which lets you charge at enemies and knock them around. Nothing really to say about this either. It's pretty fun though. Then there's Undertow, which lets you wash away your enemies or tangle them up in moist tentacles so you can do with the victim as you please. God, this script is horny. Lastly, there's Return to Sender, which lets you produce a small shield in front of you that protects you from gun damage, or you can hold the thing and toss back the ordnance you've gathered in your shield as an explosive deadly grenade, and hopefully not miss like my dumbass did. As I say, most of these are not as necessary to your success or survival as the game wishes they were. They literally had to invent a reason for you to need to go and find Shock Jockey just so you can continue halfway through the bloody game. I mean, it is basically the same reason you needed Electro Bolt in the previous games, to open malfunctioning doors, only this is to power up malfunctioning these. I had to consciously remind myself to use them, otherwise this would be yet another run where all I did was use Possession once in a while and then Shock Jockey like maybe twice when the game needed me to. Still, they are technically useful and quite fun. Like with weapons, you can now upgrade them for money, because Adam isn't a thing this time around, which is honestly a fair choice. Like with the previous games, the combat is mostly focused on movement to stay alive, as stopping to take cover will definitely lead you to getting outflanked and slaughtered. The game also gives you this kinetic shield that protects your main health bar, which is fine. It's pretty much just there to make up for the fact that you cannot carry health kits anymore, as it will regenerate when you're not taking damage. That's one of the game's more questionable choices. You still automatically eat any food you find when interacting with it, but now you do the same with health kits and bottles of salt as well, which replaced the Eve hypos from prior games, by the way. Apparently Booker just doesn't have pockets or something. Maybe it was a misguided attempt at realism, because yeah, where the hell would we carry all these medical kits and bottles of Bioshock brand mana and all the guns and everything? Although we're playing a game where we're in a city that flies because a scientist invented gravity-proof atoms, and some of our enemies are teleporting Birdmen and robotic George Washington, so why draw the realism line at the depth of our bum bag? It's a design choice that bugs me to this day. Still, it's hardly a game-breaking issue, and when you have someone like Elizabeth with you who will scrounge for supplies when you fight, like health kits and extra ammo, it's not the worst thing to have to contend with. Though half the time when I play it, she'll chuck me a new gun to replace the whole 2 bullets I just fired, or maybe she'll chuck a bottle of salts to refill my already full salts. But when she works right, she's a blessing. She doesn't fight though, that's up to you, and whilst you do spend the entire game escorting her around the city, you never actually have to protect her in combat. She can take care of herself, you've only got to worry about you, and I think that's probably the best way to do this. A game-long escort mission would be such a shockingly bad idea that even Elon Musk would have the right to call you a bonehead. In general, the combat is quite a lot of fun. The guns feel satisfying to use, are pretty much all useful, and look really nice with great attention paid to their visual design. The arenas are wide open with plenty of space to manoeuvre, and sometimes they have these skyline rail things that you can hook onto and ride. You can't use figures whilst riding, but you can still shoot from them, which is fun, and then you can leap off them and land on an enemy and basically insta-kill them. Though, an odd detail worth mentioning here is fall damage. If you leap off a skyline, then no matter how far you drop, you'll be fine, but this isn't the same case if you just, say, walk off the ledge of something. That'll hurt. Not sure why, really. Bit weird. As is the detail where if you walk off the edge of the city, because don't forget we're in the sky here, you'll just spawn right back where you were before you walked off the edge of the city. I don't know how to feel here. On the one hand, it is nice not having to worry about death drops, but also it kind of feels like a waste of the environment. Quite often the game doesn't utilise the uniqueness of its setting very well at all, though all Bioshock games seem to have that problem. Both 1 and 2 had no swimming, though 2 did have outside underwater walk sections, but did nothing with them, so... that was supposed to be me blowing a raspberry, but I forgot the tongue. Still, that isn't to say that I think Infinite is a bad game with bad levels. Overall, I think it's very good. The game itself is of the linear, open-ended kind, where the way forward is always clear enough, but there is plenty in each of the self-contained levels to explore. You'll often find things like voxophones, the game's version of audio logs, except instead of a cassette player, it's a little record player, which I think fits the setting better, and they'll typically be full of backstory as a weirdo records every little thought they ever had.
I had thought you a fool, dear brother, when you told me that you heard wonderful music trumpeting from holes in the thin air. I began to doubt your mental integrity.
Sometimes exploring will net you some new guns or a piece of gear that grants you perks, like increased ammo reserves or boosted melee damage. Maybe if you're lucky you'll find one of these infusions that can boost either your health, shield or swords. Sometimes this stuff will be locked away and you'll need Elizabeth to unlock it for you because she challenged Jill Valentine and officially won from her the title, the Master of Unlocking. Sometimes they'll be hidden in special rooms behind puzzles that you need to solve, though by solve I mean there will be some writing somewhere, you'll search the nearby area for a book that solves the puzzle for you, then you've solved the puzzle. Something else that seems a bit odd is the fact that Elizabeth will point out lockpicks and code books to the player, but she won't ever actually pick them up herself despite being the one who can use them. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just a bit weird. There were a few moments where it feels as if the game is failing to live up to its potential, but then again, what we have isn't by any stretch a bad game. The shooting, as I said, is fun and feels good. I like the exploration and how we're rewarded for finding secrets. The streamlining of the weapon and power upgrades works just fine, and it gives you something to spend your money on because ammo and health kits are pretty much everywhere and I rarely needed to buy either, so I would otherwise just have a big pile of money. On a gameplay level, Infinite is pretty solid. It also works hard to look and sound rather nice. The game is set in 1912 and everything looks era appropriate, you know, to my limited knowledge. Even the advanced machines that make the city what it is look like they belong here. I also really like the HUD and how it matches the steampunk-esque visual theme the game is going for. I play a lot of games, like a lot of games, and half the time they don't put nearly enough work into making their HUD look as if it belongs in the game. I admit it's a minor gripe, but it's something I love seeing the attention being paid to. I am a big sucker for audio-visual consistency in games after all. Though today they're a bit meh, the game's graphics back in 2013 were pretty damn good, and even now that age has finally caught up to it, the game combats the issue with a spectacular art style that more than makes up for this. As I said, the world looks right for its era. Even the high-tech devices and tools we see feel like they belong, and the characters all have this sort of style to them, which makes them still look really good even after all these years. The sound design in the game is top notch. I personally love the little details like the violin sting that plays when you kill enemies in exceptionally brutal ways, like by breaking their neck with your skyhook or by electrifying them, then blowing up their heads. Also, the background music is pretty good, though I will admit the combat theme isn't exactly my favourite, but it's not bad at all, it's just not to my personal taste. Otherwise, scenes and moments all have the appropriate background theme playing, and it all works quite well.
15,000 feet. Hallelujah.
I'm quite happy with all the little sound effects as well, like the mechanical funks that play when you reach certain milestones and challenges, or the sort of jingly noise that plays when you acquire money, but I especially love the noise that plays when you have Elizabeth open a tear. And now I get to talk about the tears. As you make your way through the game, you'll occasionally see these little slivers in the air which indicate that a tear is there and that Elizabeth can open it, which basically brings something from another reality into our own. They can be small things like a crate of health kits or a barrel of guns, or something more significant than that, like big lumps of cover, freight hooks that we could use to get to high ground, or even mechanical allies that can aid us in battle. You can only have one tear open at any given time, but unlike the figures, I found them incredibly useful and sometimes necessary to my very survival in combat, especially the ones that let me bring a motorized patriot through to serve me. Those are very helpful. Between the good visuals, the fun gunplay, the powers, the tears, and the nearly spot-on sound effect, I can't deny that I'm ultimately very happy with what the game is. You can sense it though, can't you? The big old butt that's coming. It's such a big butt that Obi-Wan Kenobi wouldn't be saying it was no moon if he saw the size of this butt, I'll tell you that.
Hold up there. What possible butt could you be about to unleash on us? What could you possibly take a big enough issue with for you to have the audacity to use—
The story.
Ah. Bollocks.
Jokes aside, it's time to talk about the story and characters, which I think, while they have their moments, are ultimately the weaker part of the entire experience. Let's start at the beginning, shall we, for this is where things tend to begin, according to leading experts on the topic. The game opens with Booker DeWitt in a boat with two posh-sounding weirdos. He rifles through a little box of his things, and by the time we reach the standard lighthouse that the Bioshock franchise got on a bulk by discount, we learn who we are. Booker is a former soldier who is now in debt. To wipe away this debt, he's agreed to travel to the city of Columbia to rescue a woman named Elizabeth and return her to New York City. However, no one bothered to tell him exactly where Columbia is and what Columbia is, so after we explored a lighthouse and activate a pod, you can only imagine Booker's surprise when he's shot into the clouds and comes face to face with the city that he seeks. This is another thing that the game does that is both familiar yet very different to the first game. In Bioshock 1 we take a pod, but we go down and we're met with the city of Rapture deep below the sea. The atmosphere is dark and bleak as we approach, and we hear an argument over the radio that suggests things are hardly hunky-dory. In Bioshock Infinite we take the pod going up and we see Columbia still in all of its glory in the exact way the city wants to be seen. It's beautiful. The atmosphere is much lighter, and when we finally land, descending into a holy-looking welcome centre with religious singing going on and biblical-sounding verses written before us in the metal beams as we descend, we learn that the city is one where God is the talk of the town. Essentially, this place is a paradise, or as this gentleman puts it,
Or as close as we'll see till Judgment Day.
This early section forgoes combat to build its world, and to its credit, it does it really well. We see a polished, serene utopia amongst the clouds, where everything seems happy and peaceful, and ooh, lucky us. We've arrived on the day of the raffle and fair. Today is the celebration of the city's founding, and the game does well to portray just how pleased everyone is here. It also tells us that a man named Comstock is top dog around these parts, and he's something of a prophet. Keep that in mind as we go into the fair, it will be important later. If you want, you can spend quite a while in this fair in the early game, which contains an airgun shooting range or two, a chance to play with a sample vigor, it's bucking bronco if you're interested, a test your strength machine, and even a handyman on display. Those big brutes will be semi-regularly recurring enemies later on, so enjoy this brief moment of calm where one isn't slapping you in the face. We also get our first proper vigor here, possession, which we need to use to gain access to the raffle, because there's also a raffle going on, and this machine won't let us through because apparently it's full. This raffle is where things start to get a bit dark, though already we get the sense that things aren't exactly as they seem when this statue phases and changes into a different version of itself before our very eyes. When we get to the raffle, we win the prize, which is first throw. Bit of a content warning for this next bit because it delves into the nasty territory of racism. First throw, you ask? Yes, first throw at an interracial couple that have been bound and placed on the stage before a crowd of angry racists, and oh dear, this isn't good, is it? Anyway, I went to throw the ball at the presenter, but the police stopped me when they saw the AD on the back of Booker's hand, which, as a poster earlier showed us, is the mark of the false shepherd, who Comstock prophesied would kill everyone and lead the city to ruin. So the cops tried to execute us, and we're forced to kill everyone and lead the city to ruin. I guess it's still a prediction if you literally make the thing you're predicting happen. Comstock is 100% the sort of dude who goes to his KKK meetups, looks at the snack table and yells, "I predict the chips will be devoured," then proceeds to devour all the chips and then passes out in the bowl as the ghost people laugh. We kill all of the cops and our first heavy hitter enemy, the fireman, who may look fast and threatening, but one-on-one they're really not much to worry about, and from there we make our way to Monument Island, which houses the tower inside which we can find Elizabeth. Oh, we also pick up Incinerate from that fireman, but who cares? We fight our way through more police and soldiers as well, because Comstock really doesn't want us getting there, and we meet yet another heavy hitter. Officially they're called the Zealots of the Lady, but no one calls them that, they're crows. Before we reach Monument Island, Comstock greets us himself using a massive monitor on the side of one of his blimps, and he tells us that he knows why we're here and expresses some disdain as we get a nosebleed, and no, it's not because Booker is attracted to Comstock. At least I hope not. That would be so many levels of weird, and not just because the old dude's basically a Nazi. He tries to kill us by luring us into an airship and having a woman on board set fire to it. Charming. He fails, and we reach Monument Island, kinda helped along by this little distraction. Seriously, Comstock, you really are determined to fulfill this prophecy, aren't you? It's an odd place. It's quiet as the area is closed and no one's at work, I assume, because of the parade, and we get to learn a bit about Elizabeth's tear powers before we actually see her. Also, there's this thing that looks like a bunch of speakers, which is another thing in the important later category. Once we actually get to Elizabeth and she gets done freaking out about a sudden intrusion, we try to escape, and we're confronted by the Songbird, a giant mechanical beast that roams the skies of Columbia and protects the lamb being Elizabeth. You might think that this encounter would make for an epic boss fight, and maybe it would, but sadly the Songbird really only exists to signify that one act is ending and another is beginning. I'm also not entirely convinced that he exists so that he and Liz can parallel the Big Daddies and Little Sisters of the previous games, though the comparison is pretty surface level and doesn't really have as much impact on proceedings as it could. The bird is bested by us falling into some water and his eye cracking a bit. He then fucks off for ages. We see him briefly in a tear that Elizabeth opens, and again he pops by at the end of each major act, but he only really does anything useful right towards the end of the story. Until then, he just sort of exists elsewhere, proving he's really bad at his job. The first time he buggers off, he leaves us on a beach. Booker and Elizabeth are able to wander around freely for a while and can enjoy themselves for a time at a local theme park. It's a nice enough looking place, but like the rest of Columbia, the nice bit is really only for the white people. Everyone else here is either playing servant or, as we see later, living in abject squalor. I want to discuss the race issue here because it's a big part of Comstock's character, and the ideals of this city are that the white people are the bestest and everyone else sucks. I listen to a few of the voxophones as I go, and some of them are just Comstock basically saying that his servant black people should be grateful to be treated like shit because in his mind that's better than they deserve, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a wee bit uncomfortable by all this. Ooh, Jesus Christ. The issue is there's very little substance to his racism, and the game fails to explore exactly why he thinks this way. His white supremacy is ultimately what leads to a massive armed uprising by the oppressed underclass, though as I myself am white, maybe it only all seems surface level to me because I have some of that white privilege. The most I can offer is that Comstock is a racist, and that's bad. I know, only controversial opinions on my channel, but I'm hardly an expert on the admittedly complex matter. I'll just say that it feels like a cheap attempt to make us dislike the villain and his faction because anyone sensible would look at a racist and know we're not meant to be on their side. Anyway, that's enough of that tangent. Let's get back in with Bookie Boy and Elizabeth. For the first section of the theme park, Elizabeth is unaware that Booker is a man well acquainted with violence, so when some people inevitably try to do a murder to us and we have to go nah-ah and do some to them instead, it makes Elizabeth sad and she runs away. When we catch up to her, Booker basically goes, nah, it's okay because they wanted to do a violence to us, so therefore we're allowed to do a violence to them, and that's really as deep as the exploration of Booker's violence goes before we're right back into everything. Oh, I should mention that from time to time, these two pop up to sort of guide us in the right direction. They are Robert and Rosalind Lutece, and basically they're the reason why Columbia's atoms so rudely ignore the law of gravity the way they do. You might wonder why they seemingly appear wherever, and the explanation sort of comes later in the game, and it ties into why the tears exist and why Elizabeth can interact with them the way she can. As we go through the game, we learn that not only can Elizabeth open the small tears that help us in battle, but she can basically open massive ones that completely change the world around us, and the Luteces are here to describe the process as looking at two sides of the same coin. Both worlds exist, it just depends on what point of view you have. And we use the first big old tear to bring a gunsmith back to life by going to a version of Columbia where he was never killed. We needed him so that he could make guns for the Vox Populi, a faction that opposes Comstock, and because their leader, a woman named Daisy, agrees to give us the airship we need to escape the city in exchange for arming her uprising. Fun fact, Daisy is wanted for the murder of Comstock's wife, though she isn't actually the killer, she was just used as a scapegoat because Comstock is a bastard. The uprising itself is a significant event for the city, and we do play a part in it, both by first changing Columbia to a version of itself where the gunsmith wasn't killed, and then by changing it once again to another Columbia where his tools were not impounded by the police. The issue is, there was already a Booker and an Elizabeth in both of these worlds. In the one we wind up in the second time, Booker has become a martyr for the Vox, destroying a place called the Hall of Heroes, which was a museum of Comstock doing things that he technically never did. Another quick aside, early on we meet a man named Slate who actually served in the US Army with Booker a long time ago and who moved to Columbia to serve there, only Comstock is here taking credit for winning wars that Slate knows for a fact did not include Comstock. Well, they actually did, but not in the way he thinks. This new reality where the Vox are toppling the founders goes well enough at first. We fight alongside the Vox for a time, we make our way to our promised airship so that we can sod off, only Daisy contacts us to tell us that actually her Booker died and we complicate the narrative, so we need to die too.
I saw you die, Booker. Saw it with my own eyes. But my Booker DeWitt died for the Vox Populi. You either an imposter or a ghost. My Booker DeWitt was a hero to the cause, a story to tell your children. You just complicate the narrative.
I guess it just goes to show that Daisy isn't exactly a saint either. Although I admit I still sympathise with her, even if it is hard now that you're also trying to murder me. Later on, Daisy is killed by Elizabeth, who does so to save the life of a child that Daisy is threatening to kill, and Liz doesn't handle it very well and runs off and changes into a new outfit. Honestly, I kind of preferred her original dress, but I guess that one was covered in blood. We try to leave finally, and Songbird finds a window in his schedule and sees us and crashes our airship, then leaves us stranded again. What is the point of him? After the crash, we wind up pretty close to Comstock's house, so the duo decide to basically pop in and kill him because, you know, they're in the neighbourhood, they might as well. This bit is weird, because Comstock uses Elizabeth's tear power to bring back her mum from the dead as a ghost, and we have to track her down and defeat her. The reason he does that is because we're about to chop off the dead mum's preserved hand to use it to get past the DNA scanner. It's a weird game, alright? This is also the section where we learn that the Luteces built a machine that lets them mess with the tears, which is something that Comstock used to make his prophecies, and they're both technically dead, with Comstock giving the order. Oh, and we learned that Robert Lutece isn't actually the brother of Rosalind Lutece. He's her from an alternate reality. The two helped Comstock do a lot of messed up stuff and started to have misgivings, which led to Comstock sabotaging their machine in an attempt to silence them. By the end of this section, the songbird has appeared again, and this time actually captures Elizabeth and takes her away, and now we have to fight through Comstock House solo and get her back. We also see a possible future where Elizabeth actually sees Comstock's plans through. His plans, you ask? Well, he wants to bathe the world in fire and have his heir sit the throne on this new world, since using the tear machine has led to him developing super cancer, which will claim him long before he can see his plan come to fruition. That's why he needs her, because she's his heir. This section without Elizabeth is weird, and I feel like it was meant to be quite challenging with harder enemies and limited ammo drops, but once you learn to avoid the big light that triggers the enemies, you'll do absolutely fine. Once we have Elizabeth back, she threatens us with a twister, just go with it, and it comes time to storm the Hand of the Prophet, the enormous war-ready airship that Comstock calls his own. After fighting through Comstock's remaining forces, we get to the old geezer, and after a very brief confrontation, we drown him in a cutscene and it's all over. We don't really get a say in what happens here, the game just gives us what's basically a time to kill the big bad like a little bitch prompt, and we proceed to do that very thing. Then, Booker gets a nosebleed, foreshadowing a discovery that comes in a few minutes, and the next thing we know, we're defending the airship as we proceed to Monument Island with the goal of destroying Elizabeth's tower so she can use her tear powers and take us back to a time before Comstock did any of the shit he did. Remember those big speaker things in the tower earlier? Yeah, those are the things that dampen Elizabeth's powers and make it harder for her to open tears properly. Apparently she used to be able to create new tears, but that's a power she lost with age, and it's because of this thing. In this section we get to take control of Songbird, and by that I mean we can decide to make him attack the ground or an enemy airship. Basically he works as a quickly delete that enemy move. Well, I say quickly, it does come with a long ass cooldown that only gets longer if you use him to attack the airships like you're supposed to. If you're wondering how we're controlling him, inside one of these statues that we keep seeing is a whistle that Liz manages to liberate, and earlier we meet the Lutesses playing a tune on a piano, the tune being the thing that gets the bird's attention so long as it's played via a whistle. After we use the songbird to destroy the tower and Elizabeth's powers become unlocked, she transports us to Rapture from the previous games, Songbird drowns, and now we're in the final stretch. Elizabeth can now see all the doors to other worlds and what lies behind them. Basically that's what the tears are, so we explore this area for a bit. Blimey, there are a lot of lighthouses. And we see that Comstock bought Booker's daughter, Anna DeWitt, yep, AD herself, remember the brand from the back of Booker's hand. And when Booker tried to weasel out of the deal, Comstock fled through a tear, only the kid didn't make it all the way through and her pinky gets cut off. Yes, that's right, Elizabeth is also missing her pinky finger, which I forgot to mention until now. Oh, the mystery. Well, not really anymore, it's obvious, ain't it? Elizabeth is Anna. Would have meant more if I'd built that up properly. Booker is her real father, and he sold her because he was deeply in debt, and Comstock offered to wash away all of that debt in exchange for his daughter. Booker then goes into a 20-year slump before Robert and Rosalind Lutece approach him with a chance to make it all right. And long story short, after ducking through world after world, we learn of a pivotal moment. A baptism. Booker DeWitt is a haunted man, scarred by the things he did in the army and desperate to wash away his sins, so he goes to baptism. Well, ours once again chickens out of this, however there's a version of him that actually went through with it and became Zachary Comstock. A shocking twist that the game all but gave away before the defense mission. In the end, a group of Elizabeths appear who've been travelling between the worlds, killing Comstocks left and right, and they drown us at the moment of baptism to prevent this Booker from ever becoming Comstock. And that's where the story ends. You may have wondered why I said the game sort of gave away the ending at the moment where Booker kills Comstock and gets a nosebleed. See, as we travel between the worlds, we occasionally find people with bloody noses. Those are the people who were dead in other timelines, and Elizabeth theorises that this is a result of them remembering to some extent their deaths in the alternate timelines. Booker gets quite a few of these nosebleeds, one at the beginning where Comstock talks to him and tries to kill him, one after discovering that he's a martyr of the Vox Populi and died in the Hall of Heroes in that timeline that we entered, and of course one right at the end where he kills Comstock. So if you've been paying attention, you'll get the connection and the twist will be revealed beforehand, or of course you'll get that as soon as Elizabeth explains it all earlier.
Remember him dead in that cell? Maybe in some way he remembers that too.
Kill my husband?
How do you reconcile that?
Not gonna lie, the only reason it took me until the Comstock death the first time around was because the first couple of times Elizabeth explained it, I wasn't actually listening. But anyway, that's the reveal given and the relevance of the nosebleeds explained. Let me be clear, I don't think the story itself is bad. I might have sounded dismissive at a few points, but ultimately I think it's a neat story with a lot to offer. It's just when alternate timelines come into play, I personally find it tends to reduce my enjoyment. That's just me. It's just things start to feel feel pointless in the grander scheme as all when you add all the other timelines into it. The ending is a bit full of itself and some bits aren't quite as impactful as the game clearly wants them to be, but I won't say I dislike it. I do get a twinge of sadness in that final act when I see Booker's biggest regret play out and see him powerless against his own choices, although I don't think this game explores the themes of one's own choices being out of our hands anywhere near as well as the first two games do. In both of those games you're a creature bred to obey and you're driven by your programming to complete your task. In Infinite it's more a story of a troubled man trying to seek forgiveness for his sins and ultimately perishing because of them. What I mean is the story happens because Booker fucked up and the alternate version of himself is continuing to fuck up. Still, that's basically the plot of the base game and it's fine. I enjoy it well enough, though I think it lacks the feel of a Bioshock story, so it's time to dust off my "this is a good game but a bad installment of its franchise" hat, which I've previously awarded to Fallout 4 and Dark Souls 2, so now they have a new friend. There are some gameplay bits that I forgot to mention, like the battles with the handymen, which were meant to substitute the old Big Daddy fights, but they're only comparable on a surface level and kind of just act as if the game is saying that it wants this fight to be a lot more annoying. There are several challenges the player can do, like find all the voxophones or kill a certain number of enemies with each weapon, which you don't really need to do. You don't get anything other than a trophy or an achievement, but they're there if you want to do them, which I like. I like the visual detail on the infusions where they shift between the three possible options of what upgrade they offer until you choose one and they become certain. Nice detail. And of course I think the game struck a perfect balance of linear open-endedness with just enough additional things to explore to make the worlds feel more interesting, but with the way forward always being clear. In truth, I think Bioshock Infinite is an absolutely brilliant game when examined on its own, with a great visual style and plenty of good gunfights for you, as well as a fairly competent narrative with moments that will really get to you. Not a great Bioshock game, but a great video game. So that's all sorted.
Oh, are you forgetting something?
No, I don't think... Oh no.
Yes.
Oh no.
Yes, the DLC. Come on, discuss the DLC, why don't you? You're already here.
I really wanted to end on a high note though.
Yeah, and Foo Fight Studio wanted to be the next Pixar. Some things are never going to happen, so come on. DLC. All 3 bits.
Fine. This video wasn't fucking long enough already. Let's quickly, and I mean quickly, talk about the DLCs. Starting with... This DLC is basically you entering a room full of baddies and shooting them for money, with the room offering you a bonus reward if you can kill enemies in a specific way. Not sure why this had to be a DLC, it adds nothing new to the game, it could have easily been base game content. Though it does give us access to a museum where we can use the money that we earn in fights to buy concept art and character models, which isn't a terrible feature, but again, this easily could have been part of the base game. I really haven't got anything else to say, I only played for long enough to get my name above the other 2 on the scoreboard and then I left. Clash in the Clouds? Yeah, it exists, that's really all I've got to say. Now, on to the real DLCs. Burial at Sea is split into 2 episodes and it takes us back to Rapture from the original game, with this world's Booker being a private investigator who is contracted by an older, hot Elizabeth to find a missing child, a young girl named Sally. This DLC does a couple of things right. For starters, it gets rid of the stupid weapon limit and fuck, I really thought I had at least 2 positive things to say here, but I guess not. The DLC does away with the 2 weapon limit, but it also drastically reduces your ammo cap. I get that Burial at Sea wants you to be more careful and methodical when taking on its enemies, which is fine, but it still feels like a weird move, though of the 2, episode 1 is far more generous with ammo. By episode 2, we're playing as Elizabeth, and she's so combat inexperienced that her ammo cap is even more limited, but we'll get to her in a moment. It's not an overly long or particularly interesting first episode. We get to see Rapture before it falls to ruin, which is kind of neat, and we also talk with Sander Cohen, the nutty artist from the first game, but when we get to the shooty stage, we're pretty much just playing the base game, but with a different coat of paint. The weapons are mostly just the base game weapons, but with a new colour scheme, though the DLC does bring back the Tommy gun from the first game, and it also gives us a microwave gun, which is fun to use, so points for that, even if the reduced ammo cap takes the fun out of using either of them. We still cannot carry extra med kits or salt bottles, so if we get too shot up, then we're kinda screwed, and Elizabeth seems a lot less helpful this time around. Like with the base game, the early section of the DLC is a violence-free stroll through the city as we try to get into Sander Cohen's art show to question him about Sally, as Elizabeth claims one of her sources told her that he was involved somehow. If you want to, you could explore this area and find some audio logs or some money, but to be honest, I feel my drive to explore virtually non-existent in this place because it just doesn't feel right. Anyway, after robbing a bunny mask from a store, just go with it, we can get in to see the artist, and he makes us dance and then zaps us. We wind up in a sectioned off building where the city sends its criminals in our pursuit of Sally, sent there by Cohen, who claims that this is where she can be found. Long story short, we discover that she's been turned into a little sister, one of those kids that produce the super drug Adam, and when we find her, we end up having to beat down a big daddy just to get to her. At the end, it's revealed that this Booker that we've been playing as is actually a former Comstock whose attempted abduction of Anna DeWitt ended tragically in the kid's demise, and we're killed by the big daddy we just defeated, and the episode ends. I'll be honest, I have little if anything to really say here. The DLC feels the need to give us a skyhook again, even though there's no reason for that thing to be here, and in general the experience of returning to Rapture is ruined a bit for me by the fact that Infinite is trying to tie itself to the events of the first game. That's not really something that you should try, Infinite. It's bad enough just being a Bioshock game that feels distinctly un-Bioshocky, but then trying to tie yourself directly to the original game so blatantly gives the feeling of a fan fiction that desperately wants to be canon. Also, fuck off trying to convince me that the plasmids used to be drinkables. No, they didn't. Eat my ass. I reject everything that you're trying to do here. The second episode lets us play as Elizabeth, and it is the far more interesting of the two, but again it shoots itself in the foot by basically making us responsible for setting the entire first game into motion. Anyway, what's it like playing as Liz? Elizabeth is physically much weaker than Booker and lacks real combat experience. She loads weapons slowly, her melee damage is a fraction as powerful, and she can maybe take one harsh looking at before dying. This means that episode 2 is a lot more stealth focused, which I honestly don't mind. I like stealth, and when games can do it well, I'm all for it. Infinite achieves it competently enough, but because it's just kind of fine, I don't really have anything to say about it. You have your enemy awareness meters, you have your small gaps that you can fit in, and your tool, plasmid in this case, that lets you see enemies through walls, and it all works fine. The story is a bit more interesting, as Elizabeth is really the one responsible for Sally being where she is now, and feels like arse for putting an innocent kid in the way of her revenge kick. She came here to kill Comstock and didn't care who got hurt along the way. The entire second episode is Elizabeth helping Atlas from the first game in exchange for Sally, who he and his splicers have kidnapped. Oh boy, I can't wait to take control of Elizabeth and put her tear powers to good use.
Well, guess what, stupid? I'm taking away her tear power for this episode, and you could just eat all the flavors of shit under the diarrhea rainbow.
Yeah, should have guessed really. The reason Elizabeth cannot do her tear power thingy is because that this version of her is technically dead and was brought back by the Lutesses as a full version of herself. Originally, her pinky was gone, and being separated by a tear was the reason that she could see and control them. But now she has her finger back, and that cool power she had is gone. Still, it was interesting enough to sneak around a mock-up of Rapture, and I did like watching a man get impaled by a big daddy near the end, but honestly, not a lot really happens in this episode either. Though we do get to see the Lutesses talking the Vox's leader into letting the original Elizabeth kill her. Why? Oh, it's so that the original Liz would grow up and basically go on to kill all the Comstocks later. I mean, it's an alright moment, think of the bigger picture angle, but it really just feels like Bioshock Infinite wants you to think it's really clever. I mean, you are clever, Bioshock Infinite, just not as much as you think you are. I'll be perfectly honest, I've already said everything about the DLC that I feel I need to cover. It's not great, and I don't think it was the right move to try and tie the events of Infinite to the first game. Booker and Elizabeth are cool characters, but just sticking them in here and trying to make them super duper special and important like this is just kinda sad. There were some good moments. I do like that we get to see a dark side of the cheery and helpful Atlas from the first game, and seeing Dr. Suchon getting drilled for slapping a little sister like he deserves was pretty neat, so, you know, as I say, not all bad. The atmosphere of Elizabeth's final moments where she is tortured for information by Atlas and taps into a final sliver of tear energy just to give the man what he wants so he'll free the girl was appropriately desperate and grim, and it's kinda sad to see Elizabeth's story end in her death beneath the sea, but honestly, I just don't think the story overall was that good. Again, I despise Infinite for trying this hard to tie itself to the original game because it's 100% unnecessary. Plus, for me, it just retroactively taints the original story knowing that fucking alternate dimensions were the real cause of Rapture's downfall.
How can you tell me that you're going away?
Ultimately, Bioshock Infinite is a really good game. The shooting feels great, and the environments allow the player the freedom to move around, flank, get to high ground, etc., and the various mechanics like tears and vigors are great additions to a solid base of gunplay. The story is a bit smug about itself, but it was pretty much interesting throughout, and as a whole, it's still a game that I love and I'm happy to go back and play. I still don't like it as a Bioshock game. I don't think it works as one, and I don't think it really fits into that world despite its attempts, but I do love it as a fast-paced FPS with RPG elements, and it's got a pretty good narrative to boot. I'd say I recommend it if you haven't played it, so definitely go for the complete collection, because that way, alongside Bioshock Infinite, you also get 2 real Bioshock games. And that'll do, I think. Thank you so much for watching this video and actually waiting on me to release this mess. A lot of little reasons got in the way here, mostly burnout. Burnout was the big issue. Still, we should return to normality shortly. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. You can also pop over to my Patreon and become a supporter if you want to help the channel grow, and you'll get these reviews unlocked for you 24 hours early as a little thank you. Or you can visit my T-Bill shop and get some merch, because who doesn't love a bit of merch? I'll leave links to those places in the description of the video as well as in a pinned comment below, and with that all done, I am now going to go and lie down. Love you all. We'll see you next time.